YouTube, this is Justin, aka Demonic Sweaters, and today I have a response video for Karim. He commented on my old drum lesson video, and I apologize for the reflection on my glasses. I have a ring light here in the studio, so there's really not much I can do about it. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk about Karim. He was saying that he just has problems with coordination with his feet and using his feet playing the drums. He doesn't understand how drummers can do different things with different limbs. You know, for example, like so. Now, of course, you know, I could just say, you know, the easy answer to this is just to practice, and that really is it, because you really just need time to develop the independence of your limbs. Now, the other thing, though, that I did want to bring up, and the reason why I made this video, is it's very important to have your pedals adjusted correctly, as well as the way you're using your foot on the pedal to be a correct position and, you know, a comfortable position for you to play. Now, before I switch over to the other camera, I also wanted to mention, and I talked about this in my last video, that it's a good idea just to make sure that when you're seated behind the drum set, that you're positioned in a way that you are basically straightforward. I know my camera's a little offset, so it looks like I'm off to the side, but I'm really not. Everything is basically right in front of me and to the side of me, and it's all kind of symmetrical. So I'm not twisting my body in any, like, you know, uncomfortable position to play the drums, and everything that I do, it's all right here, right within my reach. And I do play a pretty small set, so, and I'm in a tiny little room, but even if I weren't in a tiny little room, I would still be playing a small set. My floor tom is down here, and the ride isn't really over it, it's just the angle of the camera makes it kind of look like that. But there's actually, you can see here, I have plenty of space to come down on my floor tom. But again, you really need to make sure that you're just positioned in a way to where you're evenly spread apart and everything is symmetrical, so that way you have a good balance on your throne, the throne being your seat. And another thing too is you want to make sure you have a quality throne. The throne I use actually is very old school. This is actually called a Canister Throne. Let me just pick this up. This thing is basically a trap case to hold all of my stands that I keep inside of it. But you don't have to have one like this. These are pretty hard to find, and they're not adjustable as far as height, so you're pretty much stuck with whatever height it is. But I'm just used to it, and I like it. But you want to make sure you have something that is sturdy and, you know, gets good back support. I don't really recommend the ones with a back on them. Like, I know some people like those, but you really shouldn't be leaning back while you're playing drums. You want to keep your back, the muscles in your back be supporting you, and be sitting up straight, and have a solid base underneath your butt. Because if you don't, you're wobbling all over the place, and it makes it harder to, like, you know, just stay on, you know, rhythm, basically. So, okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to switch down to the camera I have down here below, and I'm going to show you guys some ways that you can use your foot on the pedal that I think are helpful. All right, so if we look down at my right foot on my bass drum, if you notice when I play the drums, I'm actually keeping my heel up. I don't know if you've ever, like, been sitting at the dining room table at Thanksgiving or something and you get nervous and you're bouncing your knee up and down. That's pretty much the motion that I tell people to do when they're playing the drums. You know, you can play heel down too, which is your heel on the actual base of the pedal. And some old school jazz drummers play this way, but I don't think you really get that much power out of it. For me, you get a lot more power if you have your heel up. And another thing too, your shoes are going to make, like, I'm wearing some really chunky shoes right now, and these things might not be good for some people. I'm to the stage where it doesn't really bother me. Basically any shoe that I'm wearing is fine. But when I was younger, I used to prefer to play in socks. Like, I didn't wear any shoes, I just wore socks, or barefoot. But I don't know, that's not super important. the main thing is the positioning. You want to make sure you keep your heel up and you sort of drop down. You sort of drop down with your leg. Like that. And another thing I wanted to mention is when you hit the bass drum, say if you come down on it and the bass drum beater, which is this right here, this is your beater, this thing, and when you hit the bass drum, you want that, well, it depends on what you're doing. Like, for example, there's a lot of different factors involved here on your bass drum. My bass drum that I'm using right now doesn't have a hole cut in the front of it. Now, some people might think that this is only relevant when it comes to recording. However, this is not the case at all. This is actually very relevant as to how your bass drum will actually feel. Now, when you have a bass drum without a hole cut in it, you're going to get a lot of rebound from that bass drum. And what can happen is it can make it pretty difficult to play. If you're used to play, especially if you're used to playing one with a hole in the front of it, if you have a hole in it, when you hit the beater on the bass drum, you can kind of lay into it and just leave it on there. Like, say this is the head, when you hit the bass drum, you can just leave it like that. But if you're using one without a hole, you kind of need to develop a new style to where you're bouncing back like you would with a drum, you know, like a regular drum, a snare drum or something. So on the bass drum, what I'm going to do is play for a little while, and you guys can just watch my feet. I don't know how well you can see my second foot here, my left foot. Not very well, it looks like, but that one is my other, that's a double bass drum pedal, so that's the other pedal there. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to stick to the single bass drum for this example, so you guys can watch my foot as I play. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as you can see, my heel is kept up pretty much all the time, and then like one of the things that you may have noticed towards the end there, I was doing some pretty fast double hits on the bass drum. And the way I'm able to achieve that is by using the nervous knee technique that I was talking about before. It's basically you could practice this by not even sitting behind a drum set. Let me get my keys out of my pocket. But if you're like sitting at the table, just bouncing your leg up and down, most of your muscles that you're using for this are coming from your calf, and actually your leg and your ankle is kind of like bending. So like when you're bouncing your foot like that, you can get a lot of fast motion. And some people, you know, kind of talk about traveling up the pedal as you do it. I don't really even think about this. For me, it just happens automatically. I'm just bouncing my knee. That's basically the way that I do it. And the same goes when I'm doing double. I also use my left foot. I don't think you can see it down there, but maybe a little bit. On my left foot, I also keep that heel up as well. So if I'm doing double bass drum patterns like this, then I also have both heels up. And so this is why when you're sitting behind the drum set, you have to have very good balance, because if you can sit and lift both of your legs up in the air and not fall over, then you're positioned in the correct way. Because if you can have both legs up in the air, then you'll have very good control over those two limbs of your body. Now, as far as independence goes, and being able to do different things at the same time, this really just comes from practicing a lot. You can do this, basically you just force yourself into learning new things. When I was young, one of the ways that I got better at independence when I was about 15 years old, I switched my entire drum set over to left-handed. And so everything was backwards. I was playing with my left foot on my bass drum, my right foot on my hi-hat, and everything was backwards, and I left it that way for a month, and I forced myself to play that way. And what this gave me was the ability to do things like this. So as you can see, I can switch between my left and right hands, and this is very useful, and this is also quite useful when you're developing double bass drum techniques. Being able to lead with your left foot is very important. Being able to hit crashes with your left foot rather than your right foot, all of that becomes very important when you start doing different double bass drum beats. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. Just to give you some tips on the bass drum and how to use your pedal. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention actually is you want to make sure that your pedal itself is adjusted correctly. So your beater, and what I mean by that, this is the beater. If you'll notice, the beater on my bass drum it's basically extended pretty far. It's almost out as far as it goes. Now I have a little tiny bass drum. It's an 18-inch, but it's on a riser. So it can actually lift up, and it allows the beater of the bass drum pedal to strike the center of the bass drum. But you want to make sure that your pedal is adjusted to where the beater itself isn't too close to the drum, because if it's really close to the drum already, you're not going to get much power behind hitting it. Now, if it's too far back, it's going to be slapping back and hitting you in the foot. And that really can be painful, especially if you have a beater like, let me get it, especially if you have a beater like this. If that thing came back and slapped you in the foot, that can cause serious injury. And I've had that happen before, and it is not fun. But I don't use this beater anymore, mainly because of that. Now, actually, that's not the main reason. The main reason is I lost the other surface, and this felt surface is too soft. So that's really the main reason. But so you want to make sure that those are adjusted correctly. And what is correct? Correct is really personal preference. Now, some people, if you're a super fast metal player, some of those guys like their beaters very close to the head because they don't have to travel very far to play a very fast double bass drum beat. But again, you're not getting much power out of that. And that's one of my pet peeves with a lot of metal drummers is here are these guys playing, what is supposed to be really heavy music, but they're barely tapping their bass drum. It's just very weak sounding. The only way that it sounds good is when it's mic'd up and they have a trigger on it, and a lot of times they do that, because otherwise it just sounds like total weak, just weakness. But anyway, what else? If you, so the spring on the side of the bass drum. Now, a lot of the bass drums have different ways to adjust them. Over here, I have a spring on mine on the right, and I like mine pretty much right in the middle. Not too loose and not too tight. A lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some drummers, a really good drummer I know, my friend Darren, he plays with the bass drum pedal almost, it's so loose that the spring is barely hanging on there. So that works really well for him. It doesn't, I can't play it like that, but some people, it's just whatever feels good to you. So I recommend experimenting with it, trying different tensions and see which one works better for you. And also, this can also change depending on the bass drum too. I know all this sounds very complicated, but it is kind of. I mean, depending on how the bass drum feels, you may have to adjust your pedal to compensate for how the bass drum feels. For example, on this one, since there's no hole, and I can't just leave the beater on the head I can, but the problem with that is I get a lot of double sounds. You'll get something that sounds like this. I'm trying to, but it's like almost like two unintentional hits happening at the same time. But so depending on the bass drum, you know, you may have a pedal on one bass drum and you take it off and put it on another one, and it doesn't feel as good as it did on the one before, and you have to change it because the bass drum feels different. So yeah, all of these things are things to consider when you're dealing with the bass drum in general. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful, and you guys liked the video. If you did, click like and thumbs up, and you can subscribe, click the bell icon, you know, so you get notified and all that. And please check out my Patreon if you can. It's just patreon.com/demonic sweaters. And yeah, thanks. See ya.